Hello and welcome to the fourth and final video of the day. Okay, on this video on my top 1000 we're counting down from 190 to 181. Okay, more videos will follow tomorrow. So let us go through this video now, starting on fighter number 190, and that fighter is Joe Calzaghe. Okay, the Welsh world champion, okay, beat 10 world champions. He fought 108 rounds against champions, and he beat 2 Hall of Fame fighters individually, fighting 24 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. Joe Calzaghe had 13 fights against rated fighters, and he scored a total of 32 knockouts, okay, 22 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 11 knockouts in the first round. Joe Calzaghe was top 10 rated as a fighter for 12 years, and he had a longest unbeaten run that ran to 46 fights his entire career, of course, retiring undefeated. Calzaghe was pound for pound rated for 5 years in my all-time rankings, and he had 2 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 2 wins. Both wins against pound for pound top 3 fighters, and both wins against pound for pound number 1 fighters. And Joe Calzaghe's opposition fought rate comes in at 2 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 2 from 13. So Calzaghe had 10 fights against champions. He was fully unbeaten, of course, so 10 wins with 2 knockouts. He had 2 fights against Hall of Famers. Obviously, both were wins with 0 knockouts. And Joe Calzaghe had a large title fight record, again, fully undefeated, of course, 22 world title fights, 22 wins with 21 title defences. So there's Calzaghe in 190. When we go to fight at 189, we come to the defensive wizard Nicolino Locce, one of Argentina's great boxers. Now, Nicolino Locce beat 7 world champions. He fought 124 rounds against champions, and he beat 3 Hall of Fame fighters individually, fighting 64 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. Locce had 19 fights against rated fighters, and he scored 14 knockouts, 2 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 0 knockouts in the first round. And Locce altogether was top 10 rated for a total of 11 years. Now, 11 years, yeah. His longest unbeaten run was one of 57 fights, and Locce was pound for pound rated for 4 years. Good evening, Paul. Yes, I'll have a look, mate, when I've finished recording. Or do you want me to look now? I'd have to go get my phone. Locce had 8 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 5 wins. He scored 2 wins against pound for pound top 3 fighters and 2 wins against pound for pound number 1 fighters. And Nicolino Locce's opposition fought rate comes in at 5 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 4 from 13. So Locce had 11 fights against champions, including 7 wins, 2 losses, 2 draws with 1 knockout. He had 6 fights against Hall of Famers, including 3 wins, 1 loss, 2 draw with 0 knockouts. And Nicolino Locce had 8 title fights, including 6 wins, 2 losses, no draws, and 5 title defences. Later will probably be best, buddy. Oh, sounds very ominous. So, Nicolino Locce is in 189. Okay, let us go to fighter 188. And that fighter is a fighter called Leo Lomsky. Leo Lomsky beat 5 world champions. He fought 151 rounds against champions. And he beat 3 Hall of Fame fighters individually, fighting 125 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. Now, Leo Lomsky was well travelled in fighting the contenders of his time. He had 50 fights against rated fighters, scoring 40 knockouts. Lomsky scored 17 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 1 knockout in the first round. Leo Lomsky was top 10 rated for 5 years, and he had a longest unbeaten run of 27 fights. Now, Leo Lomsky was pound for pound rated for 1 year, and he had a total of 14 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 5 wins. Lomsky scored 2 wins against pound for pound top 3 fighters and 1 win against pound for pound number 1 fighters. And Leo Lomsky's opposition fought rate comes in at 6 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 4 from 13. So Leo Lomsky had 15 fights against champions. That includes 6 wins, 7 losses, 2 draws with 0 KOs. He had 12 fights against Hall of Famers, including 4 wins, 6 losses, 2 draw with 0 KOs. And Leo Lomsky had 1 title fight that was a defeat. Drunk Irishman in the chat. So there we have Leo Lomsky, 188. Okay, fighter number 187. Okay, is James J. Jeffries, who had a very good career for his short career size, a very stacked resume for his short career size, and a great title record for his short career size. Sadly, when he's got just 20 plus fights in his career, he's been matched against fighters who have 200 fights and have accomplished a lot and fought a lot as well. It becomes hard. Although in the new ratings, James J. Jeffries actually, at the moment, is playing quite well, although there's a lot of fighters to add. so I don't know his final placing. James J. Jeffries beat 4 world champions. He fought 80 rounds against champions, and he beat 4 Hall of Fame fighters, fighting a total of 135 rounds against Hall of Fame fighters. Now, as a pre-rating era fighter, Jeffries had no fights against rated opponents. He scored 16 knockouts, 8 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 1 knockout in the first round. And James J. Jeffries was top 10 rated for 0 years. Now, he had a longest unbeaten run that ran to 21 fights, and James J. Jeffries was pound for pound rated for 5 years. Now, Jeffries had 10 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 8 wins. He scored 4 wins against pound for pound top 3 fighters and 2 wins against pound for pound number 1 fighters. And James J. Jeffries' opposition fought rate comes in at 2 from 18, and his opposition beat rate is 1 from 13. I can't remember the last time I had an opposition beat rate of 1. It must have been a long time ago in the countdown. James J. Jeffries had 7 fights against champions, including 6 wins, with just that loss to Jack Johnson, of course, no draws and 5 knockouts. He had 9 fights against Hall of Famers, including 7 wins, 1 loss, 1 draw, with 5 knockouts. And he had 9 world title fights, including 8 wins, 1 loss, no draw, and 7 title defences. So, onwards we go to fighter 186, okay, to a fighter of the world, the European bantamweight world title, but then was pushed and challenged to go to America to fight the real world champions. I once had a debate with someone years ago. They were saying, no, Charles Liddell was a world champion. I'm like, it wasn't a world champion, not for the main titles. They're like, no, it was, because this book or something said he were a bantamweight world champion. No, he held the European world title that would later morph into pretty much the European belt, okay, but actually when you read the articles of the time, even some of the newspaper writers in Europe are challenging him to go to America to fight the real world champions, so it kind of answers the point for me. But Charles Liddell was an excellent fighter, and he's actually one of France's great fighters. Liddell beat 4 world champions. He fought 175 rounds against champions. And Liddell beat 3 Hall of Fame fighters, fighting 106 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. Now, he was a pre-rating era fighter, so he has a reduced number of 6 fights against rated fighters. And Liddell scored 86 knockouts. Half of them, 43, were inside 3 rounds or less. And Liddell scored 15 first round wins. Now, he was top 10 rated for 0 years, of course, being a pre-rating era fighter, and the longest unbeaten run he had in his career was an unbeaten run of 25 fights. Now, Liddell was pound for pound rated for 0 years. He had 3 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 1 win. He scored 0 wins in the other 2 pound for pound categories. And Charles Liddell, opposition fought rate comes in at 5 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 3 from 13. Yeah, Martin, you're back on form today, mate. Yeah, I ain't got you once. I nearly got you this time, but not quick enough. Yeah. Charles Liddell had 15 fights against champions, including 5 wins, 10 losses, no draws, and 3 knockouts. He had 10 fights against Hall of Famers, including 3 wins, 7 losses, no draw, with 3 knockouts. And Charles Liddell had 0 world title fights. So on to fighter number 185. Okay, that fighter is a fighter who is not an all-time great, okay, he's not even what I'd call an elite-level middleweight champion from his era. He was a rough-and-tumble experienced fighter who fought pretty much a who's who of almost everybody you can imagine, scoring many good wins, also suffering many defeats. But he was the legitimate lineal, undisputed middleweight champion at world in his career, George Chipp. Now, George Chipp, okay, beat 5 world champions. He fought 189 rounds against champions, and he beat 3 Hall of Fame fighters, fighting a massive total of 321 rounds against Hall of Famers in his career. Now, as a pre-rating era fighter, he has that reduced figure of 13 fights against rated fighters, and George Chipp scored 35 knockouts, okay, 12 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 1 in the first round. Now, Chipp was top 10 rated for a total of 0 years. He had the longest unbeaten run that ran to 10 fights, and he was pound for pound rated for 2 years in my all-time rankings. 2 successive years, if I recall. Now, George Chipp had 40 fights against pound for pound fighters. Many at top 10 pound for pound fighters now haven't even had 40 fights. Some of them were way off 40 fights. Now, he scored 6 wins from those fights. He scored 4 wins against pound for pound top 3 fighters and 2 wins against pound for pound number 1 fighters. And George Chipp's opposition fought rate comes in at 9 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 3 from 13. Kind of alluding there to the fact he fought all that massive opposition, but he only beat a certain certain amount of it. Now, George Chipp, had 22 fights against champions, including 7 wins, 13 losses, 2 draws and 3 KOs. He had 34 fights against Hall of Famers, including 4 wins, 28 losses, 2 draws and 2 KOs. And George Chipp had 6 title fights, including 5 wins, 1 loss, no draw and 4 title defences. The lack, his low percentage of his major fights, the low number of big wins he had from his big fights hurts his rating. His overall career gets him to where he gets to, as well as being lineal undisputed middleweight champion. And I once said to someone, who criticised his win-loss record, etc., against certain categories of fighters, and I said, well, frankly, from those 34 fights against Hall of Famers, if he'd only lost 4 and won 28, and all them other wins on there on his resume, you'd be looking at a potential top 10 all-time fighter. The fact he didn't win all those fights knocks him down. Big shout out to Antonio Mosley in the chat. Good to see you as always. So, we have to remember that we have to credit fighters for having that incredible career, but at the same time, we have to be honest and admit that he didn't win enough of his big fights to go any higher than he is. But if you just look at his career and look at who he fought, if he'd have won most of those, or a lot high percentage of them, you'd be talking, you could potentially have him top 20 all time, without a shadow of a doubt. Sadly, he didn't win most of them. So, on to, number 184, Now, this is a more modern era fighter, Miguel Cotto. Now, Miguel Cotto beat 16 individual champions, and you'll notice that with the modern fighters, they have huge amounts of champions beating the top level ones, because everybody's got title belts now. I mean, you can open your porch on a morning, and there's a drone there dropping you off a WBA belt. I mean, they get handed out to every Tom, Dick and Harry now, don't they? Miguel Cotto beat 16 world champions. He fought 216 rounds against champions, and he beat 1 Hall of Fame fighter individually, fighting 36 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. Now, Miguel Cotto had 25 fights against rated fighters, and he scored 33 knockouts in his career, 8 of them in 3 rounds or less, and 1 in the first round. Now, Miguel Cotto was top 10 rated for a total of 15 years, and he had the longest unbeaten run that ran to 32 fights. Now, Cotto was pound for pound rated for 3 years. He had 7 fights against pound for pound fighters, scoring 4 wins. He scored 3 wins against pound for pound top 3 fighters and 2 wins against pound for pound number 1 fighters. And Miguel Cotto's opposition fought rate comes in at 3 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 2 from 13. So Miguel Cotto had 22 fights against champions, including 16 wins, 6 loss, no draw, with 12 KOs, matching in the win-loss record against terrible Terry Norris. Now, in terms of fights against Hall of Famers, he had 3 fights, including 1 win, 2 loss, no draw, with 0 KOs. And Miguel Cotto had 26 world title fights, including 20 wins, 6 losses, no draws, and 14 title defences. So there's Miguel Cotto in 184. Fighter number 183, is the great defensive fighter Packy McFarland. Now, Packy McFarland, was one of boxing's great defensive fighters from his era. Never became a world champion, which hurts his standing to many people. But what's not in question is how good of a fighter he was. I remember reading a newspaper article, and this writer was beside himself because Packy McFarland actually had been taking some clean shots in a fight. The guy was like, I can't believe he was getting hit. Kind of tells you how good he was at his best. So Packy McFarland, beat 4 world champions. He fought 99 rounds against champions, and he beat 4 individual Hall of Fame fighters, fighting 103 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. Packy McFarland, pre-rating era fighter, had 0 fights against rated fighters. He scored a total of 50 knockouts, including 18 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 1 knockout in the first round. Now, Packy McFarland was top 10 rated for 0 years, and he had a longest unbeaten run of 104 fights. Antonio Mosley, thank you for saying that. We judge by what they did, not what IFS. Yeah, absolutely agreed, Antonio. Working on a boxing project. Interesting. I'm very curious, Antonio. Sounds interesting. So Packy McFarlane was pound for pound rated for 2 years in my all-time rankings, and he had 9 fights against pound for pound fighters, scoring 6 wins. He scored 4 wins against pound for pound top 3 fighters and 4 wins against pound for pound number 1 fighters. And Packy McFarlane's opposition fought rate comes in at 4 from 18, and he's gonna his opposition beat rate is 4 from 13. So fights against champions, McFarlane had 8. Only 8, and in that era many fighters were having 20, 30, sometimes 40 or more. Crazy numbers of fights against champions, even in a time when there were not as many champions. But he had 8 going unbeaten in them fights, including 5 wins, no losses, 3 draws and 1 knockout. He had the same record minus the knockout against Hall of Famers, 8 fights in total, 5 wins, no loss, 3 draw, and he had 0 world title fights. So there's Packy McFarlane in 183 when we go to fighter 182. Now this fighter is not well known by many people, but you are looking at a very, very good fighter from his time. This fighter is called Frankie Burns. Now Frankie Burns, beat 4 world champions individually. He fought 172 rounds against champions, and he beat 4 Hall of Fame fighters individually, fighting a total of 202 rounds against Hall of Fame fighters. Now, Frankie Burns had 67 fights against rated fighters. He scored 29 knockouts, 12 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 1 knockout in the first round. And Frankie Burns was never top 10 rated. Now, Frankie Burns had a longest unbeaten run of 39 fights. I'm not sure that rated fighters is Frankie Burns'. I'm going to double check that after the video, but it looks wrong. Now, he was pound for pound rated for 0 years, and he had 7 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 3 wins. He scored 0 wins against pound for pound top 3 fighters and 0 wins against pound for pound number 1 fighters. And Frankie Burns' opposition fought rate comes in at 7 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 5 from 13. In fact, let me just double check that while we're live. The advantage of having everything in file is that I can just immediately check things. Don't look right to me. There we are. Right, let's have a look along. Yeah, I'm not sure what I've done there, but I've put that in wrong. I will get the correct figure and enter the correct figure in the chat. So let us leave. Oh no, we haven't finished on Frankie Burns yet. So he had an opposition fought rate of 7 from 18, and he had an opposition beat rate 5 from 13. Now, he had 15 fights against champions, including 6 wins, 6 losses, 3 draws with 1 knockout. He had 18 fights against Hall of Famers, including 8 wins, 6 losses, 4 draws. So 18 fights against Hall of Famers with a slight winning record in there. And most people have never heard of him. He had 4 draws and scored 1 knockout. And Frankie Burns had 3 title fights. All of them are defeats. So we go on to fighter number 181. And that fighter is Gumbo Smith. Now, in terms of overall resume, Gumbo Smith thrashes many fighters even on this video. But sadly, like George Chipp, he lost too many of them to score any higher. Now, Gumbo Smith, beat 5 world champions. He fought 207 rounds against champions. And he beat 4 Hall of Fame fighters, fighting 209 rounds against Hall of Famers. Yeah, it's funny, Martin, because have a look at this comment. Yeah, Paul, it's very kind of you to say I've inspired you to do a top 1,000 jazz musicians. Like I said, buddy, just find what you're looking for, what factors you're looking for, and rate them on that, and just go with it. Antonio Mosley, it's amazing the Ring magazine will post articles on their social media about pre-rated era boxers, but won't go back and rate the boxers. Yeah, and if they did that, Antonio, and they had Ring rankings and they put them back to say 1890, yep, I'm all over that. I'll have all Ring rankings and the ratings and everything collated in no time, in less than a week, for all the divisions. Martin Dunstan, BL, you're human after all. Yeah, I am human. Big shout out to me buddy, Random Acoustic Thoughts in the chat. Hope you're well, buddy. Good to see you. So, yeah, Gumbo Smith. He had He beat 4 Hall of Fame fighters, fighting 209 rounds against Hall of Famers, and he had 11 fights against rated fighters, even being a pre-rating era fighter. Now, he scored 38 knockouts, 23 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 3 knockouts in the first round, and he was never top 10 rated. Now, Gumbo Smith's longest unbeaten run was a run of 21 fights, and he was pound for pound rated for 0 years. Now, Gumbo, had 20 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 3 wins. He scored 1 win against pound for pound top 3 fighter and 1 win against a pound for pound number 1 fighter. And Gumbo's opposition fought rate comes in at 7 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 3 from 13. A lot of people don't realise Gumbo Smith was... If he fought Georges Carpentier, and had he won that fight, he'd have been put as the number 1 contender for Jack Johnson. But sadly, he got DQ'd against Carpentier, so it blew his chance. But he kind of fought a who's who of everybody. Even later in his career, fighting devastating puncher Harry Wills, the Black Panther, and fighting Harry Greb, etc. He pretty much would fight anybody of anybody. His resume is so thick with big names from that time. It's almost incredible he had all those tough fights fighting those top-level fighters. So Gumbo had 23 fights against champions, including 5 wins, 16 losses, 2 draws with 0 knockouts. He had 23 fights against Hall of Famers, including 4 wins, 17 loss, 2 draw with 0 knockouts. And Gumbo Smith had no world title fights. The DQ loss to Carpentier robbed him of that chance. Although, interestingly, Carpentier didn't get a chance against Johnson either. He would later, of course, fight the Manasseh Mauler Jack Dempsey. So anyway, there's my latest video, 190 to 181. Big shout out to everybody in the chat. I will meanwhile correct that figure on Frankie Burns at some point, and if I remember, leave a comment in the... I knew it was wrong, because it's kind of sad really, but a lot of these stats, I look at them and I'll read them, I think, no, that's wrong. He didn't do that. And I immediately thought that's wrong. So yeah, it's interesting how sad when I notice a stat is wrong. Antonio Mosley, Gumbo Smith is extremely underrated. Put his resume in today, time people will see he's the GOAT. Oh yeah, even not factoring the losses, Antonio, even if you just look at the wins and the level of wins he had and put him in a list, it is a very impressive list. Now, the thing about Gumbo is he also lost a lot of his later fights, later losing to Wills and Greb and others in second half of his career. When you look at his career, he suffered way... The large bulk of his defeats came in second part of his career. In the first part of his career, thing about Gumbo is he was like 6'2.5". He was a very precise puncher. He was very economical. He used to try and time shots. He'd throw straight punches accurately, but he wouldn't waste energy. He was an economical boxer. And a lot of people, me personally, I don't think so. I don't think he would have bet even that Jack Johnson 1913 to 1915. I think Johnson would have still been too much for him. But I think he would have been a good challenger because of his boxing style. The reason why Joe Jeanette, even though he got beat by Johnson a number of times, the reason Joe Jeanette got Johnson to foul him low and Johnson got DQ'd and Jeanette got the win is because Jeanette was staying at distance. Now, if you went into Jack Johnson head first trying to engage him, a number of things are going to happen. One, he's going to time you and he's going to hit you with them punishing check left hooks, or he's going to hit you with them punishing right uppercuts or jolting straight right hands. Now one of those 3 things is going to happen when you move in on him. Then when you close distance on him, he's going to grapple you, he's going to grab your right wrist, he's going to bend your wrist up your back, he's going to sap your energy, he's going to tie you up so you can't let punches go. You can't walk into Jack Johnson throwing vicious hooks and hope to win, because he's going to time you coming in. If you do get inside, he's going to tie you up, he's going to sap your energy. Jeanette showed how you beat Jack Johnson. Circle around outside of him, not moving into him to engage, and firing long, raking straight punches at him. Pot shotting straight punches at him, but not coming inside where Johnson, is naturally a great defensive fighter. And Gumbo Smith was a similar kind of fighter to that, but I don't think he was as good or as tough as Jeanette, and I think Johnson would have beat him anyway. But he'd have been a good challenger for Johnson at that time because he hadn't suffered all the later defeats he would suffer. He was on good runs of form, he was gaining some good wins, so it would have been a good name for Johnson. But anyway, there's my latest video, 190 to 181. More videos coming tomorrow. This is my 4th day. I consider that a good effort. I'm easily going to get the playlist done now before end of of October. I mean, we're not even in October yet, and I'm already putting on my final spurt. Once the playlist is finished and I've done top 10, I will take 3 or 4 days break. I think I deserve a break after all this grind for 6 months, 7 months, and then I will, come back with the career videos and more of my graph videos, etc., etc. But I will get this playlist finished in the next few weeks. And then it's up there in all of its full 1,000. And then after that, I'll continue. During this time, I am going to continue rescoring my top 1,000. I'm at like 350 fighters rescored now. So if I get a spare 2 or 3 hours, I can cover 100, 200 fighters, no problem. So anyway, I will bid all of you farewell. Okay, big shout out to everyone in the chat. Always love having you around here and appreciate you being here. I always said on my other channel, I have got one of the best live chats, because on my other channel, we Rasclot and everyone else adding in. I never had the name calling and the petty nonsense. When someone showed up with any form of racism, name calling, sniding, snaky behaviour, they'd get blocked. And I had such a great live chat. A great mind, so I always appreciated that, and I still appreciate it now on my new channel. I'm so happy to see some of you guys have followed me over. So there's my latest video. I'm the Boxing Librarian. I'm out now.